What if Q entered Warhammer 40,000? The question itself would amuse him. In the vast tapestry of the multiverse, few realities proved as stubbornly, magnificently absurd as the Imperium of man in the 41st millennium. A cosmos where hope was heresy, where faith demanded ignorance, and where humanity's survival rested upon the decaying corpse of a 10,000-year-old god-emperor. Khorne had witnessed countless civilizations rise and fall across infinite dimensions, but none quite matched the spectacular tragedy of this particular iteration of humanity. They had conquered the stars only to enslave themselves to dogma. They had achieved technological marvels only to worship them as divine mysteries. They possessed psychic powers beyond imagination, yet feared and persecuted those who manifested them. It was, in Q's estimation, the most exquisite cosmic joke he had ever encountered, and Q did so love a good joke. The entity that mortals called Q materialized aboard the bridge of the Imperial warship Eternal Judgment, appearing precisely 3 feet above the command throne occupied by Inquisitor Dawn. He hung in the air for a dramatic beat before dropping into a seated position directly upon the armrest, one leg swinging casually as he surveyed the shocked faces of the bridge crew. "Don't mind me," Q announced cheerfully, examining his fingernails with exaggerated nonchalance. "Do continue with your grim determination and joyless duty. I'm just here to observe humanity at its absolute worst. Well, one version of humanity. You lot really outdid yourselves in the dystopia department." The bridge erupted in controlled chaos. Weapons were drawn, alarms shrieked, and servitors mindlessly continued their functions, unaware that reality itself had just been violated. Inquisitor Dawn, to her credit, remained perfectly still, her augmented eyes analyzing the intruder with cold precision. Her hand moved to the bolt pistol at her hip, though some instinct told her it would prove spectacularly useless. "Identify yourself, Xenos," Dawn commanded, her voice cutting through the commotion like a blade. "You have 5 seconds before I order your termination." Q laughed, the sound echoing impossibly throughout the vast bridge despite no apparent amplification. "Oh, how delicious! 5 whole seconds. Tell me, Inquisitor, what happens when those 5 seconds expire and your weapons prove as effective as prayer?" Which in this reality is to say not at all effective despite your fervent beliefs to the contrary. He snapped his fingers, and every weapon on the bridge transformed into a bouquet of flowers. Bolt pistols became roses. Plasma rifles became lilies. Plasma rifles became lilies. Even the massive ship-to-ship cannons visible through the viewport sprouted enormous sunflowers from their barrels. "What manner of sorcery is this?" gasped Tech Priest Mordian, his mechadendrites twitching in what might have been mechanical anxiety. The machine's spirits cry out in confusion. "Sorcery? Please?" Q rolled his eyes dramatically. "What you call sorcery, warp manipulation, or psychic phenomena is merely physics you're too primitive to understand. Which, given your deliberate rejection of scientific progress in favor of ritualistic maintenance of technology you no longer comprehend, shouldn't surprise anyone." He gestured at the Tech Priest's extensive augmentation. "Case in point. You've replaced 70% of your body with machinery you worship rather than understand. It's like watching children play with a calculator by hitting it with rocks and calling the resulting sparks divine communication." Inquisitor Dawn rose slowly from her throne, her expression carved from ice. "You speak heresy with every breath, entity. The Omnissiah guides our understanding. The Emperor protects through faith. Does he, though?" Q materialized directly in front of her, his face inches from hers. "Because from where I'm standing, which is to say everywhere and nowhere simultaneously, your Emperor has been a corpse on a throne for 10,000 years. He requires the psychic sacrifice of 1,000 souls daily just to maintain his barely functional existence. That's not protection, my dear Inquisitor. That's the most expensive life support system in galactic history, paid for in the currency of human suffering." Dawn's hand shot forward, attempting to grab Q by the throat. Her fingers passed through him as though he were smoke. Q tusked disapprovingly. "Physical violence. How predictably Imperial. You encounter something you don't understand, so you try to kill it. Do you wonder this galaxy is in such a state?" He snapped his fingers again, and suddenly the entire bridge crew found themselves seated in a comfortable theater, still in their positions, but now in plush seats with cup holders. A massive screen materialized before them, showing images that made several crew members cry out in horror or denial. Oh, let's review, shall we? Q produced a pointer from nowhere and began his lecture. 10,000 years ago, your emperor, a powerful psyker, I'll grant him that, attempted to guide humanity into a golden age, noble enough intention. Then his favorite son got corrupted by the very warp entities your emperor tried to deny existed, leading to a civil war that devastated your entire civilization. The screen showed images of the Horus heresy, the betrayal at Isstvan, the burning of Prospero, the siege of Terra. Oh. The emperor, rather than exercising any of that vaunted wisdom you attribute to him, decided the best response to chaos was to pretend it didn't exist. Brilliant strategy. Truly, it's like dealing with a disease by refusing to acknowledge germs. The emperor's wisdom is beyond question, Dawn stated, though her voice carried less certainty than before. The images on the screen were sourced from records she knew existed but were sealed under the highest levels of inquisitorial authority. Beyond question, or beyond question, or beyond question. Q materialized beside her, his voice dropping to something approaching seriousness. That's the foundation of your entire civilization, Inquisitor. Don't question, don't investigate, don't learn, don't grow. Oh, grow. Just follow orders, recite prayers, and feed more souls into the corpse God's life support while calling it purpose. He gestured to the screen, which now showed the daily operations of the Astronomican, the psychic beacon that enabled warp travel. Psykers were shown being consumed by the thousands, their life force drained to keep the beacon lit. This is necessary, Tech Priest Mordian interjected, his electronic voice wavering. Without the Astronomican, humanity cannot navigate the warp. Civilization would collapse. Necessary, Q repeated, tasting the word. How that single adjective has justified uncountable atrocities throughout history. You know what else could work? Actually understanding warp physics instead of treating it like mystical evil. Developing artificial intelligence to manage navigation instead of lobotomizing humans into servitors. Cooperating with other species instead of declaring everything non-human to be Xenos filth worthy only of extermination. He snapped his fingers again. The theater vanished, returning them to the bridge, but now the viewport showed something impossible, a peaceful world where humans, Eldar, Tau, and other species work together, their combined technologies creating wonders beyond Imperial comprehension. Heresy, Dawn whispered, but her eyes remained fixed on the viewport. This cannot be. Can't it? Q materialized in her command throne, lounging with theatrical disregard for protocol. This is a reality just three-dimensional shifts from yours. Same galaxy, different choices. In this version, humanity didn't embrace xenophobia as state religion. They didn't sacrifice progress on the altar of tradition, and look at the result. No chaos incursions because they actually understand and properly shield against warp phenomena. No need for an Astronomican because they developed stable warp drives. No endless war because they realized cooperation achieves more than conquest. Lees, Dawn said, but the word came out hollow. I say, Dawn said to Xenos cannot be trusted. All the galaxy knows this. Q laughed again, but this time the sound carried an edge. All the galaxy knows this because your Imperium taught them to believe it. Self-fulfilling prophecy on the cosmic scale. You declare all non-humans to be enemies, you attack them on sight, and then you point to their retaliation as proof of their inherent hostility. It's circular logic so perfect it would be funny if it weren't responsible for quadrillions of deaths. So he stood, and for the first time, something other than amusement crossed his features. When Q spoke again, his voice resonated with power that made the ship's hull groan. I've watched your species across countless realities. Inquisitor Dawn. In most, you reach for greatness. You stumble, you struggle, but you grow, you learn, you evolve. But here you've achieved the impossible. You've created a civilization that actively prevents human advancement, that treats curiosity as corruption, that demands blind faith over evidence, that sacrifices its best and brightest to maintain a status quo of suffering. The viewport changed again, showing scene after scene of Imperial life. Children taken from families to serve as servitors, entire planets declared expendable and subjected to exterminatus. Inquisitors ordering the deaths of billions to contain rumors of heresy. Forge worlds where workers were literally worked to death and their bodies rendered down for nutrients. Hive cities where billions lived in squalor while the aristocracy dwelled in obscene luxury above. All of it, every horror, justified by necessity and the Emperor's will. This is the price of survival, Dawn stated, but her voice shook. In a galaxy of endless war, there is only war because you make it so. Q's shout shook the bridge. Your Imperium encounters a new human colony that developed independently. You conquer it and force compliance. You meet a peaceful Xeno species, you exterminate it on principle. You discover a new technology, you declare it tech heresy and destroy the inventor. Every single choice you creates more war. He calmed visibly, straightening his uniform, which seemed to shift styles every few seconds from Starfleet to formal, wear to judge's robes and back again. The tragedy, Inquisitor, is that it didn't have to be this way. Your Emperor, for all his considerable flaws, actually intended something better. But his death created a vacuum filled by exactly the kind of fearful, rigid thinking that he fought against during the Great Crusade. The Imperium you serve isn't his dream. It's his nightmare, given form and sustained by the very faith he tried to eliminate. Dawn sat down heavily in a secondary chair, her usual composure cracking. Around the bridge, crew members looked to each other uncertainly. Everything they knew, everything they believed, was being systematically dismantled by an entity they couldn't threaten, couldn't harm, couldn't even properly comprehend. Why? Dawn finally asked, her voice small. Why show us this? What purpose does it serve to destroy our faith? Q's expression softened genuinely, surprisingly. Because, Inquisitor Dawn, buried beneath all that indoctrination and dogma, you still possess something remarkable. Curiosity, the courage to question. I've been watching you for some time. Every secret you uncover, you ask uncomfortable questions. Every atrocity you witness in the Imperium's name, you wonder if there might be another way. You suppress those thoughts, of course. You've been trained to recognize them as the first whispers of heresy. But they persist. He snapped his fingers and suddenly Dawn was somewhere else. A private chapel aboard her own ship, a place she retreated to when doubt plagued her. There, hidden behind a loose panel, was a forbidden book, an unedited copy of Imperial history, showing the Emperor as he truly was rather than the sanitized God figure of official doctrine. Q gestured to it. You seek truth even when truth is declared heretical. That's why I'm here. Not to destroy your faith, but to test whether it can evolve into something worthy of preservation. Before Dawn could respond, the ship lurched violently. Alarms shrieked as reality itself seemed to tear at the seams. On the viewport, the familiar colored madness of the warp began bleeding into real space, impossible geometries forming and reforming as chaos entities attempted to manifest physically. Ah, Q said conversationally, as though discussing the weather, right on schedule. Your friends from the Imperium decided to investigate the disturbance I created. How lovely. I haven't had a proper conversation with parasitic warp entities in ages. Oh, the bridge doors exploded inward, but instead of cultists or demons, 4 massive presences filled the space, not physically but conceptually. The air turned thick with competing energies. Rage manifested as burning brass. Decay brought the stench of rot. The stench of excess created sensations almost too intense to bear, and the scheme wove probability itself into impossible knots. The 4 chaos gods, or at least fragments of their attention, had focused upon this ship. Dawn and her crew fell to their knees, overwhelmed by the sheer psychic pressure. Only Q remained standing, looking thoroughly unimpressed. Well, Khorne, Nurgle, Slaanesh, and Tzeentch, or should I call you by what you really are? Cancerous tumors in the fabric of reality, given consciousness by the psychic emanations of sentient suffering. Q walked through the manifestations as though they were holograms. You've been dining on this galaxy's pain for millennia, haven't you? And humanity, oh humanity, has been such a wonderful buffet. All that fear, all that anger, all that despair. You must love the Imperium. It's the most efficient suffering generation system ever devised. The presence identified as Tzeentch spoke, its voice 1,000 contradictory whispers. The architect, the outsider, the one who stands beyond. We know you, Q of the continuum. You do not belong in this realm. Nobody belongs anywhere. Q replied cheerfully. We all just are. But you four? You're fascinating parasites. You didn't create the warp. It existed long before you. You're just patterns that emerged from psychic feedback loops. Sentient symptoms of a disease rather than the disease itself. Humanity's negative emotions fed you. You grew strong enough to influence humanity, which generated more negative emotions, which fed you further. It's elegant, really. Horrible, but elegant. The Khornate presence raged, reality cracking under the weight of its fury. We are eternal. We are power itself. Q waved his hand dismissively. The Chaos God's manifestation winked out like a candle flame. Your noise, very loud, very dramatic noise, but still just noise. Let me show you something interesting. With a snap of his fingers, the nature of the warp itself became visible to everyone on the bridge. Not the howling madness of chaos, but the underlying structure, an infinite ocean of psychic energy that was, in its natural state, neutral. The Chaos Gods appeared as they truly were. Massive whirlpools in that ocean, created by and sustained by the psychic emanations of sentient suffering, but not inherent to the warp itself. This is what your Emperor saw, Q explained, addressing Dawn even as the Chaos Gods raged against his revelations. The warp is just a mirror reflecting the emotions of the Imperium. When humanity was optimistic and hopeful during the dark age of technology, the warp was relatively calm. When the age of strife brought suffering and despair, these four parasites grew fat on the negative emotions. The warp isn't evil, Inquisitor. It's reactive, lactive. And right now it's reacting to 10,000 years of constant, sustained human misery. Nurgle's manifestation swelled, bringing plague and entropy. We offer release from suffering through acceptance of decay. We are natural. We are inevitable. Q turned to face the decay god with an expression of profound disappointment. Your stagnation given false consciousness. You convince your victims that giving up is the same as finding peace. It's not. It's just giving up. He snapped his fingers again. Nurgle's presence diminished, compressed into a small, almost pitiful core. See? Strip away all the rationalizations and you're just a psychic tumor that whispers, why bother trying? To anyone who'll listen. How banal. The Slaaneshi presence coiled seductively through the bridge, its voice promising endless pleasure, yet you cannot deny the appeal. Q. Sensation, experience, the fullness of existence without limit or restraint. Addiction. Q interrupted flatly. You're not about experiencing life. You're about consuming it until nothing remains but the craving for more. Every single one of your blessings is just a different flavor of self-destruction. He turned to Dawn, his expression serious. This is what they offer, Inquisitor. Khorne offers strength through mindless rage. Nurgle offers peace through giving up. Slaanesh offers fulfillment through consumption. Tzeentch offers power through schemes that never end. Every single gift is a trap. They're not gods. They're the universe's worst impulses, given form and voice. Tzeentch's presence writhed with infinite complexity. And yet without us, the warp would be formless. We give it structure. We give it purpose. We are necessary. Q actually laughed at that. Necessary? You're about as necessary as cancer is to cell division. Yes, you emerge from natural processes, but that doesn't make you beneficial or required. He expanded his arms, and suddenly the bridge crew could see, truly see, what the galaxy could become if the Chaos Gods were somehow neutralized. The warp didn't disappear. Instead, it became a tool, a resource, navigable and useful, without the constant threat of demonic incursion. Psykers didn't need to fear their own powers because those powers were no longer conduits for predatory entities. This is possible, Q stated simply. Not easy, but possible. It requires humanity to stop feeding you with their suffering, which means dismantling the Imperium's entire structure of oppression and fear, which means questioning everything you've been taught, which means fundamentally growing up as a species. The four chaos presences surged in unified rage, attempting to manifest fully and overwhelm the ship through sheer psychic force. Q sighed theatrically. Oh, very well. If you insist on the dramatic confrontation. He snapped his fingers. The Chaos Gods vanished, not destroyed, but simply removed from the immediate area, their connection to this particular region of space-time severed. The bridge returned to normal, or as normal as anything could be with Q present. Dawn stared at him, her world fundamentally shaken. If you possess such power, why reveal it to us? Why not simply fix everything? Q's expression turned genuinely sad. Because it wouldn't stick, Inquisitor. I could remake your entire galaxy with a thought. Eliminate the chaos gods, resurrect your emperor, usher in a new golden age. But it would be my golden age, not yours. Within a generation, maybe less, you'd be worshipping me as the new god emperor, and we'd be right back where we started. Humanity surrendering its agency to something it perceives as divine. He moved to stand before her, meeting her eyes directly. You have to choose this, Dawn. You and people like you across the Imperium. You have to decide that the current path is unsustainable. That faith without understanding is just pretty chains. That survival at any cost eventually costs everything worth surviving for. I can show you alternatives. I can prove that other ways are possible, but you have to be the ones to walk those paths. The Imperium will never change, Dawn said, but there was a question in her tone rather than certainty. It's too vast, too entrenched. The Ecclesiarchy, the Adeptus Mechanicus, the High Lords of Terra, they will never accept Reformation. Probably not, Q agreed. Which means Reformation won't come from the top. It'll come from people like you, making different choices in small ways that accumulate over time. Asking questions instead of reciting catechisms, seeking to understand technology instead of just worshipping it, seeing other species as potential allies instead of automatic enemies, treating psykers as humans with abilities rather than witches to be burned. He snapped his fingers one last time. Dawn found herself holding a data slate she'd never seen before. On it was information, real, verified, historical information about the Imperium's founding, the Emperor's true intentions, the manipulation and lies that had transformed his secular vision into a theocratic nightmare. Also included were treatises on actual warp physics, technological schematics that the Mechanicus had deemed too dangerous to preserve, and records of peaceful human worlds that had been destroyed simply for refusing to worship the Emperor as a god. Forbidden knowledge, Dawn whispered, even as her fingers tightened protectively around the slate. Possession of this would mean execution. Yes, Hugh agreed. That's rather the point. Your Imperium controls its population through ignorance. Knowledge is declared heretical because educated citizens ask uncomfortable questions. You now possess the single most dangerous weapon in this galaxy, the truth. He began to fade, his form becoming translucent. What you do with it is entirely up to you. Destroy it and return to comfortable certainty, or read it, share it, and accept that everything you believed might be built on foundations of lies. Wait, Dawn called out as Q's form continued to fade. Will I see you again? Q's smile was enigmatic. That depends entirely on whether this galaxy becomes interesting enough to warrant my return. Surprise me, Inquisitor. Choose growth over stagnation. Choose questions over answers. Choose humanity over blind faith in inhuman doctrine. Or don't. Your species has free will, even if you've forgotten how to use it. With those final words, Q vanished completely. The bridge crew looked to each other, then to their Inquisitor, waiting for orders. Dawn looked down at the data slate in her hands, then up at the viewport where stars shone with their usual cold light, unchanged by the revelations that had just shaken her understanding of reality. Ma'am, ventured one of her acolytes, your orders? Your orders? Inquisitor Halev Dawn stood silent for a long moment, weighing the comfortable certainty of faith against the dangerous uncertainty of knowledge. In that moment, she represented a choice that countless individuals across the Imperium would face if Q's interference spread ripples through the great ocean of humanity. Remain in ignorance or reach for something more. Finally, she spoke, her voice carrying a conviction that felt new yet right. Plot a course for the nearest Forge world. I have questions for the Mechanicus, questions that require actual answers rather than ritual responses. Her crew hesitated, sensing the shift but not yet understanding its magnitude. Dawn looked at the data slate again, then secured it carefully, and increased security protocols. What we carry now is more dangerous than any Xeno's artifact. It's the truth, and the Imperium fears truth more than it fears chaos. As the eternal judgment altered course, Q watched from a dimension perpendicular to standard reality, a small smile playing across his features. One person choosing knowledge over dogma wouldn't change a galaxy. But choices like ripples had a way of spreading. In the grim darkness of the far future, there was only war. But Q had just introduced something the Imperium feared more than war, the possibility that it didn't have to be this way. and possibility once introduced was remarkably difficult to extinguish. The question, as Q himself might phrase it, was whether humanity in the 41st millennium still possessed the courage to reach for it, or whether 10,000 years of enforced ignorance had finally erased their capacity for growth. Only time would tell, and Q, as always, had all the time in the cosmos.